The blood on her scrubs was supposed to wash away like it always did. A gunshot wound to the abdomen, just another Tuesday night in the trauma ward at Chicago Mercy Hospital. Lila stitched him up, asked no questions, and walked away. She thought she had saved a stranger. She didn't know she had just bought a one-way ticket into the brutal empire of Gabriel Mercer. 4 hours later, her apartment door was kicked off its hinges. The man bleeding out on her table was now the man holding her life in his hands. The fluorescent lights of the Chicago Mercy Hospital emergency department had a persistent, irritating flicker that could drive a sane person mad by hour 10 of a 12-hour shift. It was 3:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, the time of night when the city's ghosts usually crawled out of the woodwork. She was Dr. Lila Hastings, a 31-year-old trauma surgeon drowning in six-figure medical school debt, fueled by nothing but lukewarm cafeteria coffee and sheer stubborn willpower. The hospital was understaffed as usual. Chief of Surgery Dr. Arthur Pendleton had cut the night staff budget again, leaving Lila with only a handful of nurses to manage the fallout of Chicago's violent underbelly. She was just finishing up the paperwork on a drunk driving laceration when the automatic doors of the ambulance bay didn't just open, they were violently forced apart. No sirens preceded them, no radio call from dispatch. 3 men moved through the entrance with terrifying synchronized purpose. 2 of them were absolute mountains of muscle wearing tailored, expensive dark suits that looked entirely out of place in the sterile, bleach-smelling hallway. The 3rd man was suspended between them. He was tall, powerfully built, but his head was bowed and a terrifying amount of arterial blood was dripping onto the pristine white linoleum, leaving a grotesque trail behind them. "We need a doctor, now," the man on the left spoke. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried a chilling authority that made the hairs on the back of Lila's neck stand up. His name tag, if he had one, would have read "Professional Killer." He had a scarred jawline and cold, dead eyes. "Sir, you need to go through triage." Nurse Jenkins started stepping forward with her clipboard. The second man simply reached under his suit jacket, flashing the steel grip of a Glock 19 tucked into his waistband. "No triage. A doctor. Now." The ER went dead silent. The few patients in the waiting area seemed to shrink into their plastic chairs. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, spiked in Lila's veins. She didn't think. Her training simply took over. "Get him into Trauma Bay 1. Lila ordered, stepping out from behind the nurse's station and snapping on a pair of latex gloves. "Jenkins paged the OR. Tell them to prep for a possible exploratory laparotomy. Get me 2 units of O-negative blood, a crash cart, and a central line kit. Move." They dragged him into the bay, hoisting him onto the gurney. The stark lights illuminated the wounded man's face for the first time. Even pale and sweating, he was striking. Sharp cheekbones, an aristocratic nose, and a strong, unyielding jaw covered in a dark shadow of stubble. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit jacket, now ruined by the massive stain spreading across his right side. "What happened?" Lila demanded, grabbing a pair of trauma shears. "A disagreement," the scarred man said, smoothly, stepping back but keeping his eyes locked on her every move. "He caught a bullet. Right flank." Lila cut through the expensive fabric of his shirt, exposing the wound. It was a messy entry, low on the right side of his abdomen, just above the hip bone. Blood pulsed steadily, not a major artery, thank God, but enough to cause hemorrhagic shock if she didn't stop it soon. "I need to apply pressure," Lila said, leaning her weight onto a stack of sterile gauze over the wound. The patient groaned a low, guttural sound of pure agony, and suddenly his hand shot out. His grip on her wrist was like a vice. His eyes snapped open. They were a piercing, stormy gray, sharp and utterly terrifying. He wasn't looking at her like a dying man. He was looking at her like a predator assessing a threat. "No. Hospitals." He grated out his voice, a dark, raspy baritone that vibrated in the small room. "You're already in one and you're bleeding out." Lila fired back, refusing to break eye contact despite the tremor in her hands. "Let go of my wrist so I can save your life." For a long, agonizing second, they stared at each other. The gray eyes flicked down to the laminated badge pinned to her scrubs. Dr. Lila Hastings. He read it, committed it to whatever dark vault served as his memory, and then his grip loosened. "We don't have time for the ORSA," the scarred man said. "Fix him here. 10 minutes, Doc, or we take him as he is." "Are you insane?" Lila snapped, turning to face the guard. "He needs a sterile environment anesthesia." 10 minutes! The guard's hand rested on his weapon again. "Make it work!" Lila cursed under her breath. "Jenkins, bring the portable suction and the staple gun. Local anesthetic lidocaine with epinephrine now." It was the most grueling, chaotic field surgery she had ever performed indoors. She pumped him full of local anesthetic, but she knew he could still feel it when she used the forceps to probe the wound. The bullet had missed the liver by a fraction of a millimeter, lodging itself in the muscle wall. Through it all, the gray-eyed man didn't scream. He just stared at the ceiling, his jaw locked so tight she thought his teeth might shatter, his breathing ragged. "Got it!" she breathed, dropping the deformed piece of lead into a metal basin with a sharp clink. She worked furiously, cauterizing the minor bleeders and throwing rapid, precise sutures into the muscle before stapling the skin closed. She packed the wound, wrapped him in pressure bandages, and hooked up a bag of saline and a broad-spectrum antibiotic ceftriaxone. "He needs to stay off his feet," Lila told the guard, stripping off her bloody gloves. "The stitches will tear. He needs rest fluids in a sterile environment. He should be admitted." The man on the table swung his legs over the side of the gurney. The monitor beeped frantically as his heart rate spiked. "Hey, you can't stand up!" Lila rushed forward, pressing a hand to his uninjured shoulder. He didn't push her away, but he didn't stop moving either. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. She could smell copper-expensive cologne in the sharp tang of sweat. "You do good work, Dr. Hastings," he murmured, his voice sending a strange, involuntary shiver down her spine. Before she could respond, his men flanked him, supporting his weight, and they walked out as abruptly as they had arrived. The bay was left looking like a slaughterhouse, the deformed bullet still resting in the metal basin. Lila stared at the empty gurney, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had just treated a ghost. By 7 a.m., the adrenaline had completely evaporated, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. Lila handed her shift report over to Dr. Gregory, walked out into the chilly, damp Chicago morning, and climbed into her beat-up 2012 Honda Civic. The drive back to her apartment in Logan Square was a blur. The rain smeared the taillights of the cars in front of her into long red ribbons. She couldn't stop thinking about the man with the gray eyes, the way he had looked at her, the absolute control he maintained over his men without saying a single word. She had seen gangbangers and cartel members in the ER before, but this felt different. This felt like old money, deep power, and pure danger. Lila unlocked the deadbolt to her third-floor walk-up. The apartment was small, cluttered with medical journals, empty takeout containers, and the lingering scent of vanilla and old paper. It was her sanctuary. She dropped her keys on the counter, shrugged off her damp coat, and headed straight for the shower. She stood under the scalding water until her skin turned pink, trying to scrub the phantom smell of blood and sterile alcohol from her hands. When she finally stepped out, wrapped in a faded towel, she felt a fraction of her humanity return. She padded into the kitchen to make a cup of chamomile tea, her mind drifting to the soft mattress waiting for her in the next room. The kettle began to whistle. Crack! The sound was deafening, like a cannon going off in her living room. Lila spun around, dropping her mug. It shattered against the cheap linoleum, sending shards of ceramic and hot water flying across her bare feet. Her front door had been violently kicked open, the wooden frame splintered and hanging by a single hinge. 2 men stood in the entryway. She recognized one of them instantly, the scarred man from the hospital. The second was younger, with slicked-back hair and a leather jacket. "What the hell are you doing?" Lila screamed, backing away toward the kitchen counter, her hand desperately searching behind her for the knife block. "Get out, I'm calling the police." "I wouldn't do that, Dr. Hastings," the scarred man said casually, stepping into her apartment, and crushing a piece of her broken mug beneath his heavy boot. "My name is Dominic. We met earlier." "I don't care who you are. You're trespassing." Her fingers brushed the wooden block. She wrapped her hand around the handle of a chef's knife and yanked it out, holding it in front of her. The towel slipped dangerously low on her chest, but she didn't care. "I said get out," the younger man chuckled. "She's got spirit, Dom." Dominic didn't smile. He looked at the knife with mild boredom. "Put the knife down, Lila. You're a doctor, not a killer. You won't use it, and even if you try, I will break your arm before the blade gets within a foot of me." "Try me," Lila threatened, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "The boss had a complication," Dominic said, ignoring her threat completely. "He needs medical attention." "Then take him to a hospital." "He doesn't like hospitals. And he specifically asked for you." Dominic pulled a pair of heavy-duty zip ties from his pocket. He said, and I quote, "Bring me that woman. So you have two choices. You can put on some clothes and walk down to the car with us quietly. Or we can carry you down in that towel. We are on a tight schedule." Lila's mind raced, the windows too high, the fire escape. Rusted shut. Her phone was on the coffee table 10 feet away. She was trapped. "If you kidnap me, the hospital will notice. I have a shift tomorrow." She tried to reason, her grip on the knife tightening. "Your hospital just received an anonymous donation of $5 million, along with a polite email from your personal account, stating you've had a family emergency and need an indefinite leave of absence." Dominic replied smoothly. "We own the police in this district, Lila. No one is coming for you." The absolute certainty in his voice broke something inside her. The fight-or-flight response short-circuited. They had thought of everything. "Let me get dressed," she whispered, lowering the knife. 2 minutes, door stays open," Dominic ordered. Lila scrambled into her bedroom, her hands shaking so violently she could barely pull on her jeans and a heavy wool sweater. She shoved her feet into her boots and grabbed her medical bag from the closet. If she was going to be forced to treat a mafia boss, she wasn't going in empty-handed. When she walked back out, the younger man grabbed her arms, swiftly securing her wrists in front of her with the zip ties. They led her down the stairs and out into the rainy street, where a blacked-out Cadillac Escalade sat idling at the curb. Layla was shoved into the back seat, Dominic getting in beside her. The locks engaged with a heavy final thud. "Where are you taking me?" Layla asked, staring out the tinted window as her neighborhood blurred past, realizing she might never see it again. "To the estate," Dominic replied, staring straight ahead. "Pray you can fix whatever's going wrong with him, doctor, for your sake." The drive took nearly an hour, heading north out of the city and deep into the affluent, heavily wooded suburbs of Lake Forest. The Escalade turned off the main road onto a private, winding driveway, flanked by towering wrought iron gates that swung open silently at their approach. They drove through acres of manicured, rain-slicked lawns until a massive, sprawling stone mansion loomed in the darkness. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress. The car stopped beneath a grand portico. The younger man opened Lila's door and hauled her out by the elbow. Dominic cut the zip ties off her wrists with a flick of a pocket knife. "Inside," he commanded. Lila rubbed her chafed wrists, gripping her medical bag tightly as she was escorted through towering mahogany double doors. The interior was breathtakingly opulent marble floors, a sweeping dual staircase, and the distinct smell of lemon-polish old paper and expensive wood. But she barely had time to process the wealth before she was led down a long corridor and into a massive, dimly lit library. The walls were lined with thousands of books, but her eyes immediately locked onto the center of the room. There, sitting in a heavy, blood-red leather wingback chair, was the man she had saved hours ago. He was no longer wearing the bloody suit. He was dressed in loose black sweatpants and a dark, unbuttoned Henley shirt that exposed the thick white bandages she had applied to his abdomen. He looked terrible. His skin was an ashen, waxy color covered in a sheen of cold sweat. A crystal glass of amber liquid rested loosely in his right hand. "Dominic," the man said, his voice a low, raspy gravel that sounded weaker than it had in the ER, yet somehow more commanding. Leave us. Boss, I said leave us. Dominic bowed his head slightly, shot Lila a warning glare, and walked out, pulling the heavy library doors shut behind him with a definitive click. They were alone. Lila stood near the door, her heart pounding in her throat. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Finally, he slowly rotated the chair to face her fully. Those stormy gray eyes pinned her to the spot. "Dr. Hastings," he murmured, taking a slow sip of his drink. "You kidnapped me," Lila said, her voice trembling with a mixture of terror and outrage. "You broke into my home and abducted me." "I relocated you," he corrected softly, wincing slightly as he adjusted his posture. "My name is Gabriel Mercer, and as of tonight you are my private, exclusive physician, Gabriel Mercer." The name echoed in her head. She didn't follow organized crime, but even she had heard whispers of the Mercer Syndicate. They controlled the ports, the illegal casinos, and half the politicians in the state. He wasn't just a gangster, he was a kingmaker. "I don't work for criminals," Lila said, lifting her chin. "Whatever complication you're having, you need to go to a real hospital. I don't have the equipment here to deal with an infection or internal bleeding." Gabriel let out a short, dark laugh that turned into a grimace of pain. "A real hospital is exactly where the people who put this bullet in me want me to go. They paid off someone in my inner circle, an inside job. If I check into Mercy or Northwestern or Sinai, I will be dead before morning. A lethal dose of potassium in my IVA, convenient complication in surgery. No, I stay here. Then hire a discreet doctor. You have the money. I don't trust the doctors on my payroll. They've been compromised," he stated coldly, setting his glass down on a side table. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "But you're a civilian. A tired, overworked ER doctor with a mountain of student debt, no close family ties, and no connection to my world. You saved my life tonight when you could have stalled. I know you aren't working for my enemies. So my reward for saving your life is being taken hostage," Lila demanded, anger finally beginning to override her fear. "Your reward is survival," Gabriel countered smoothly. "I looked into you, Lila. 10 hours ago you were struggling to pay rent. If you keep me alive, if you see me through this recovery until I can root out the rat in my organization, I will wipe your debts clean. Every penny. I will set you up for life. And if I refuse—" Gabriel's eyes darkened, the temperature in the room seeming to drop 10 degrees. "You've seen my face. You know I'm injured. You extracted the bullet, which, by the way, was traced back to a stolen shipment handled by my own lieutenant. You are the only independent witness to my condition. If you walk out that door, you become a loose end. And I do not leave loose ends." A cold chill washed over Lila. He wasn't threatening her in a rage. He was stating a simple businesslike fact. It wasn't a choice at all. It was an ultimatum. Before she could respond, Gabriel suddenly slumped back against the leather chair. The glass on the table vibrated as his hand hit the wood. His eyes rolled back slightly, and a violent shiver racked his powerful frame. "Gabriel." Lila dropped her bag and rushed forward, her medical instincts overriding her panic. She pressed the back of her hand against his forehead. He was burning up. His skin was on fire. She quickly peeled back the tape on the bandage she had applied hours ago. The edges of the wound were angry red and swollen, radiating heat. "Sepsis," she muttered, her stomach dropping. "The bullet must have been contaminated or nicked the bowel in a way I couldn't see without a scan. You're developing a severe localized infection that's entering your bloodstream." "Oh, fix it!" He ground out, his teeth chattering as a rigor hit him. "I need IV antibiotics, vancomycin, Zosyn, bags of saline, a sterile field. Dominic has a medical wing set up down the hall." Gabriel gasped, his hands gripping the arms of the chair until his knuckles turned white. "Everything you need. Do your job, doctor. Keep me alive." Lila looked down at the most dangerous man in Chicago, watching him succumb to microscopic bacteria. He had pulled her into his dark, violent world, and now her survival was inextricably linked to his. If the Mercer King died on her watch, She knew Dominic and the others would bury her right next to him. She grabbed her bag. "Don't pass out on me, Gabriel. The night's just getting started." The medical wing Dominic led her to wasn't just a room. It was a fully functional, unlicensed intensive care unit, hidden behind a bookshelf in the east wing of the estate. It boasted a state-of-the-art Stryker hospital bed, a cardiac monitor, a portable ultrasound machine, and glass cabinets stocked with enough Schedule II narcotics and broad-spectrum antibiotics to run a small clinic. It was a stark, terrifying reminder of how often the Mercer Syndicate expected to bleed. "Get him on the bed!" Lila snapped, pointing to the mattress. Dominic and the younger guard, whom she had mentally dubbed Leather Jacket, heaved Gabriel onto the pristine white sheets. Gabriel was barely conscious now, his head lolling to the side, his breathing rapid and shallow. "His blood pressure is tanking," she said, strapping the blood pressure cuff to his left bicep and clipping a pulse oximeter to his index finger. The monitor flared to life, confirming her worst fears. His heart rate was 135 beats per minute, and his blood pressure was a dismal 85/50. He was sliding rapidly into septic shock. "What do you need?" Dominic asked. The cold professionalism in his voice had cracked, revealing a sliver of genuine panic. Gabriel Mercer wasn't just his boss. He was the linchpin holding their entire criminal empire together. If he died, a bloody power vacuum would consume them all. "Detool. I need to start a central line and pump him full of fluids and antibiotics before his organs start shutting down." Lila ordered, tearing open the glass cabinets and grabbing bags of normal saline vials of piperacillin/tazobactam and vancomycin. "Wash your hands. You're going to help me." For the next 3 hours, the underground hospital room became a claustrophobic battleground. Lila worked with a frantic, hyper-focused energy, running 2 large-bore IVs into Gabriel's veins. She pushed the antibiotics as fast as safely possible, hanging bag after bag of saline to force his blood pressure back up. She removed the bandages she had applied at Mercy Hospital, cleaning the angry, weeping wound with betadine, searching for any sign of necrotic tissue. Through it all, Gabriel burned. His fever spiked to 104.2 degrees. The powerful, terrifying Mafia Boss was reduced to a shivering, delirious mess on the sheets. He thrashed weakly against the restraints Lila had forced Dominic to apply, fighting invisible enemies in the throes of his hallucinations. At 4 a.m., the fever reached its terrifying peak. Dominic was pacing by the door, a heavy automatic rifle now slung across his chest, while Lila sat on a stool beside the bed, applying ice packs to Gabriel's neck, groin, and armpits to physically drag his core temperature down. Suddenly, Gabriel's hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around her wrist with bruising force, just as he had in the trauma bay. "Don't let them in!" He rasped, his eyes snapping open. They were glassy and unseeing, staring right through her into some dark memory. "Lock the heavy doors. The shipment is compromised." "Gabriel, you're safe," she said softly, trying to pry his fingers off her wrist without hurting him. "You're at your estate. I'm Dr. Hastings. I'm fixing you." "Lila," he breathed. It was the first time he had used her first name. The way he said it, a rough, desperate exhale, sent a jolt straight to her chest. "They poisoned the well. Carmine knew." "Dominic," Lila called out sharply, looking over her shoulder. "Who is Carmine?" Dominic stopped pacing. The color drained entirely from his scarred face. "Carmine is the underboss. He's Gabriel's cousin." The silence in the room became absolute, save for the rhythmic, steady beep of the heart monitor. If his own flesh and blood, the second in command, had orchestrated the hit, there was nowhere safe for Gabriel Mercer to hide. They weren't just fighting a microscopic infection. They were sitting in the middle of a mafia civil war. "Keep pushing the fluids," Dominic said, his voice suddenly dead and hollow. He racked the slide of his rifle, a sharp metallic sound that echoed off the sterile tiles. "And pray to whatever God you believe in that he wakes up, because if Carmine knows the hit failed, he'll be sending an army to finish the job." At 6:15 a.m., just as the pale gray light of a Chicago dawn began to filter through the heavy security blinds, Gabriel's fever finally broke. The frantic beeping of the monitor settled into a steady rhythmic hum. His skin lost its terrifying waxy pallor, replaced by the pale, exhausted hue of a man who had stared death in the face and forced it to blink. Lila slumped forward, resting her forehead against the cool metal rail of the hospital bed, utterly destroyed. She had survived the night, but as she looked at the heavily armed guard at the door, she realized her nightmare was just beginning. Lila woke up to the smell of fresh espresso and toasted brioche. For a brief, disorienting second, she thought she was back in her tiny apartment in Logan Square. Then, she opened her eyes and saw the vaulted ceiling painted with intricate frescoes, the heavy velvet drapes, and the sheer absurd scale of the mahogany four-poster bed she was lying in. The memories of the blood, the gunshot wound, and the abduction crashed down on her like a physical weight. She sat up abruptly. She was still wearing her blood-stained jeans and the heavy wool sweater from the night before. A woman stood near the doorway holding a silver tray. She looked to be in her late 60s, wearing a pristine black and white housekeeper's uniform. She had kind, weary eyes that had seen far too much. "Good afternoon, doctor," she said gently, setting the tray on a glass coffee table. "I am Martha. Mr. Mercer requested that I bring you sustenance. You've slept for 9 hours." 9 hours. Lila panicked, throwing the heavy duvet off her legs. "Gabriel, his infection. Is he—" "Mr. Mercer is awake and remarkably stubborn," Martha interrupted with a soft, knowing sigh. "His fever is gone. Dominic has been monitoring the IV fluids just as you instructed before you collapsed. There's a fresh set of clothes for you in the armoire, and the ensuite bathroom is fully stocked. When you are ready, the boss wishes to see you in his study." She left the room, the heavy oak door closing behind her. Lila heard the distinct, terrifying click of a deadbolt sliding into place. A golden cage was still a cage. Lila took a fast, scalding shower in a marble bathroom that was larger than her entire apartment. She scrubbed the dried betadine and sweat from her skin, feeling like she was trying to wash away the reality of her situation. She dressed in the clothes Martha had left, a pair of high-end dark slacks and a soft cashmere turtleneck that fit perfectly. It was a terrifying realization of just how closely they'd been watching her before the abduction. When Dominic came to unlock the door an hour later, she didn't say a word. She just followed him down the labyrinthine corridors of the estate. Gabriel was in his study, a massive room paneled in dark walnut and smelling of old paper and leather. He was sitting behind a massive desk, dressed in a dark button-down shirt that hung loosely over his bandaged torso. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his gray eyes prominent, but the lethal predatory energy he exuded was fully intact. "Dr. Hastings," he said smoothly as she entered. "Please sit." Lila stood her ground. "How is the pain?" "Manageable," he lied effortlessly. "You have my profound gratitude. Dominic informed me that it was a near thing last night. You went into septic shock. If I hadn't pushed the vancomycin when I did, your organs would have failed by sunrise," Lila said, keeping her voice clinical and detached. "You need bed rest. Sitting at a desk reading ledgers is going to tear the internal sutures." Gabriel leaned back, a faint, dangerous smirk playing on his lips. "I don't have the luxury of bed rest, Lila. My cousin Carmine believes I am dead or dying in an alley somewhere. He's currently moving to consolidate my assets, seize my ports, and buy off my loyalists. The longer I stay hidden, the bolder he gets." Then call the police. Turn state's evidence. Do whatever it is criminals do when they're betrayed. Lila snapped the sheer absurdity of the situation, finally breaking her professional facade. "You can't fight a war with a hole in your stomach. The police are on Carmine's payroll," Gabriel replied, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "If I go to the authorities, I'll be poisoned in a holding cell before midnight. No, this ends my way. In-house." He stood up, wincing slightly, and walked slowly around the desk until he was standing just inches in front of her. She had to tilt her head back to look him in the eye. "During my fever," Gabriel murmured, staring down at her, "I'm told I spoke." Leela's throat went dry. "You were hallucinating. You mentioned Carmine. That's all." "I am a man who deals in leverage, Lila," he said, reaching out. She flinched, but he only tucked a stray lock of wet hair behind her ear. His fingers were surprisingly warm. "You heard things last night that only my inner circle knows. You hold my life in your hands, and now you hold my secrets. That makes you incredibly valuable to me, but it also makes you a target." "I don't want to be a target," Lila whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I just want to go home." "You can't," he stated, a grim finality in his tone. "Carmine's men are already watching your apartment. They know a doctor at Mercy treated me off the books before I vanished. If I let you go back to Logan Square, they will torture you to find my location, and then they will kill you. Your only safe haven in this city is within these walls. With me." He wasn't lying. She could see it in his eyes. The life she knew, the hospital, the debt, the quiet apartment was gone, erased the moment the ambulance bay doors opened. "So what now?" Lila asked, feeling a cold resignation wash over her. "Now," Gabriel said, turning back to his desk and picking up a heavily encrypted satellite phone. "Now you keep me breathing just long enough for me to burn my cousin's empire to the ground." 4 days blurred into a surreal, terrifying routine. Lila checked Gabriel's vitals every 6 hours. She changed his dressings, monitored his white blood cell count using the portable lab equipment, and forced him to eat the nutrient-dense meals Martha prepared. In return, she was given free rein of the estate's massive library and indoor pool, though 2 armed men trailed her at a discreet distance everywhere she went. Gabriel was an atrocious patient. He refused painkillers during the day, claiming they clouded his judgment. He spent hours on encrypted phones, his voice a low, gravelly rumble echoing down the halls as he orchestrated a silent, bloody counteroffensive across Chicago. He was slowly cutting off Carmine's supply lines, freezing his offshore accounts, and sending a terrifying message to the underworld. The king is not dead. The tension in the house was a physical thing. Dominic barely slept patrolling the perimeter with a tactical shotgun. The sheer size of the estate, once beautiful, now felt like a sprawling liability. It happened on a Thursday night. The weather had turned vicious, a massive Midwestern thunderstorm battering the stone walls of the mansion, masking any sound from the outside world. Lila was in Gabriel's bedroom, an opulent suite on the 2nd floor. He was sitting on the edge of the mattress, shirtless, while she removed the staples from his incision. The wound was healing beautifully, a neat, jagged pink line closing over the trauma. "Take a deep breath," Lila instructed, using the sterile extractor to pinch the final metal staple. She pulled it free with a swift motion. Gabriel didn't even flinch. He was looking at her, his gray eyes tracking the movement of her hands. The dynamic between them had shifted over the last 4 days. The hostility had faded, replaced by a strange, heavy intimacy born of proximity and survival. She knew the rhythm of his heart. She knew the exact sound he made when he tried to hide his pain. "You have a steady hand, Lila," he murmured, his voice low over the crashing thunder outside. "You don't shake anymore when you're near me." "I've gotten used to the monsters," she replied dryly, dropping the staple into a metal tray. She reached for a sterile steri strip to secure the newly closed skin. "Am I a monster to you?" he asked, tilting his head. Lila paused, her fingers hovering inches from his bare skin. "You kill people, Gabriel. You run illegal gambling. You extort businesses. You kidnapped me. You aren't the hero of this story." "No," he agreed softly, his gaze dropping to her lips before rising back to her eyes. "I'm not the hero, but I'm the man keeping you alive." Before she could formulate a response, the lights in the mansion died. The room plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. A second later, the heavy thrum of the backup generators kicked in, but the lights didn't return. Only the red glowing emergency strips along the baseboards illuminated the room. Then a sound cut through the thunder. Thwip, thwip, thwip. It was the muffled, distinct sound of suppressed gunfire echoing from the first floor. Gabriel moved with terrifying speed. The injured recovering patient vanished instantly, replaced by the apex predator of the Mercer syndicate. He shoved Lila hard to the floor, rolling off the bed and plunging his hand beneath the mattress. He pulled out a sleek black Sig Sauer P226, racking the slide in one fluid motion. "Stay down!" He hissed, his eyes adjusting to the red emergency lighting. "Your stitches!" Leela started, panic seizing her throat. "Quiet!" The radio on Gabriel's nightstand crackled to life. Dominic's voice came through, breathless and punctuated by the sound of return fire. "Boss, breach on the east wing. They cut the hard lines and blew the generator circuit. We have 6, maybe 8 tangos inside. Heavy armor. They bypassed the outer perimeter. It's Carmine's kill squad." "Fall back to the grand staircase, choke the choke point," Gabriel ordered into the radio, his voice dead calm. "Do not let them reach the second floor." "Copy." Gabriel grabbed Lila's arm, hauling her to her feet. "We have to move. This room is a fatal funnel. If they breach that door, we're trapped." "Move where?" she whispered frantically, her medical bag forgotten on the floor. "The panic room, behind my closet." He pushed her toward the massive walk-in wardrobe. They had barely made it past the racks of bespoke suits when the heavy oak door of the bedroom was violently kicked open. Wood splintered and rained across the carpet. 2 men wearing tactical gear and night vision goggles stepped into the room, their suppressed rifles raised. Gabriel didn't hesitate. He pushed Lila behind the solid wood door of the closet, stepped out into the open, and fired 3 times. The sound in the enclosed space was deafening. The flashes from his muzzle illuminated the dark room like lightning. His shots were clinically precise, 2 to the chest plate of the first man, dropping him to a knee, and a third straight through the lens of his night vision goggles. The man crumpled instantly. The second intruder swung his rifle toward Gabriel, but Gabriel was already moving. Despite the fresh wound in his abdomen, he closed the distance with terrifying aggression. He grabbed the barrel of the intruder's rifle, pushing it toward the ceiling as a suppressed shot chewed through the plaster above them. With his free hand, Gabriel drove the barrel of his handgun under the man's tactical vest, right into his ribs, and pulled the trigger twice. The man collapsed, choking on his own blood. Gabriel stood over the bodies, his chest heaving, the gun still raised, sweeping the dark hallway beyond the shattered door. Blood was beginning to seep through the white bandage she had just applied, staining the fabric of his dark shirt. He looked back at Lila cowering behind the closet door, her hands clamped over her ears. In the red emergency light, surrounded by the bodies of the men he had just slaughtered without a second thought, he looked like the devil incarnate. "Lila," he barked, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Get up. We aren't safe yet." Lila stared at the blood pooling on the expensive rug. She had spent her entire life trying to stop death, to stitch it up and hold it back. And now she was tethered to a man who dealt it out as easily as breathing. Trembling, she stood up and stepped over the corpse, following the Mafia Boss deeper into the darkness. Gabriel shoved the heavy oak paneling at the back of his closet, revealing a keypad glowing with a faint blue light. He punched in a 6-digit code with a bloody thumb. The wall slid open silently, revealing a reinforced steel door. He grabbed her waist, hauling her inside, just as a fresh volley of automatic gunfire echoed up the grand staircase. The steel door hissed shut behind them, engaging with a heavy multi-tumbler lock that sounded like a bank vault ceiling. The panic room was a stark contrast to the opulence of the estate. It was entirely utilitarian concrete walls, lined with Kevlar, a bank of security monitors currently showing black static, a ventilation system humming in the ceiling, and a stainless steel table bolted to the floor. In the corner sat a military-grade medical kit, crates of ammunition, and a shortwave radio. Gabriel slumped against the steel door, sliding down until he hit the cold floor. The pistol slipped from his fingers, clattering against the concrete. "Gabriel." Lila dropped to her knees beside him. The adrenaline that had fueled his lethal burst of violence was rapidly draining away. His breathing was shallow, his face a terrifying shade of gray in the dim fluorescent lighting. She grabbed his shirt, ripping the fabric open. The pristine white bandage she had applied less than 10 minutes ago was soaked through with fresh arterial crimson. The physical exertion? She muttered, her hands instantly coated in his blood as she pressed down on the dressing. You tore the internal sutures. You're hemorrhaging. Medical kit. He gasped, his head rolling back against the steel door. Under the monitors, Lila scrambled across the small room, hauling the heavy olive-drab box back to him. She flipped the latches, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped the tray of sterile instruments. There was no anesthetic here, no IV fluids, just combat gauze trauma shears and raw survival. I have to pack it, she told him, locking her eyes onto his. It's going to hurt. A lot. Gabriel's jaw clenched. The muscles in his neck stood out in sharp relief. Do it. She didn't hesitate. She ripped the soaked bandages away, exposing the angry, torn flesh. The neat staple line she'd just closed was ruptured blood, pooling rapidly in the depression of his abdomen. She grabbed a roll of quick-clot combat gauze, saturated with a hemostatic agent designed to burn and coagulate blood on contact, and shoved it directly into the open wound. A low, guttural roar ripped from Gabriel's throat. His hands flew out, gripping her hips with bruising force, as his body instinctively fought the agonizing pain. Look at me, Lila ordered, leaning her weight into the pressure, her face inches from his. Look at me, Gabriel, focus on my voice. His eyes snapped to hers. The storm in his gray irises was wild, feral, and completely unmasked. They were trapped in a steel box beneath a war zone, covered in blood, breathing each other's air. Why did Carmine do this? She asked, keeping her voice steady, trying to anchor his mind to anything other than the burning agony in his side. Keep talking to me. Keep your brain engaged. Gabriel swallowed hard, his grip on her hips loosening slightly. The ports. I was transitioning the syndicate out of the shadows. He took a ragged breath. Legitimate shipping, political lobbying, buying senators is cleaner than buying hitmen. And Carmine didn't want to go legitimate. Carmine runs the trafficking ring. Gabriel rasped, a bitter, vicious edge creeping into his tone. Humans, women, drugs. It's dirty money, but it's fast. I told him I was shutting it down, burning the routes. I gave him an ultimatum: fall in line or walk away. He chose a third option, she murmured, her arms aching from the pressure she was applying to his wound. He paid my lieutenants, promised them double their cut if they let the trafficking continue. I underestimated his greed. Gabriel's eyes searched her face. You asked me if I was a monster, Lila. In this world, a man without a conscience is a king. The second I tried to grow a conscience, they put a bullet in my back. The bleeding was slowing. The hemostatic gauze was doing its brutal job. She grabbed a roll of heavy pressure tape and bound it tightly around his torso, securing the packing in place. Lila slumped back onto the concrete floor, wiping a streak of sweat and blood from her forehead. You're stable, for now. Gabriel looked at her, taking in her blood-stained hands, the exhaustion bruising her eyes, and the quiet resilience that had somehow kept her from breaking. He reached out his knuckles, brushing lightly against her cheek. You shouldn't be here, Dr. Hastings, he whispered. You kidnapped me, remember? Lila fired back, though the heat had left her voice. I know, he said softly. It's the only selfish thing I've done this week that I don't regret. Before she could process the weight of his words, the shortwave radio on the desk sparked to life with a blast of static. Boss, it's Dominic. Do you copy? Gabriel dragged himself up, leaning heavily against the steel wall, and keyed the mic. I'm here, Dom. Status. House is clear. We dropped 7 of them. 3 of ours are dead, 2 wounded. I took a grazing shot to the shoulder, but I'm functional. Dominic's voice was grim, devoid of its usual cold detachment. They retreated when the local PD cruisers hit the front gate. Carmine paid off the cops, but even they couldn't ignore an automatic firefight in Lake Forest. The cops are cleaning the scene, Gabriel asked. Yeah. The captain on site is one of Carmine's guys. They're boxing up the bodies and calling it a home invasion gone wrong. But boss, they know you're alive now, and they know you're hurt. Gabriel looked at Lila, a cold, terrifying resolve settling over his features. The vulnerability she'd just witnessed vanished, locked away in the vault of his mind. Prep the armored SUVs, Dom Gabriel ordered into the radio. We aren't staying here. Where are we going? We're going to cut the head off the snake. Dawn broke over Lake Michigan in streaks of bruised purple and slate gray. They had abandoned the estate an hour before sunrise, slipping past the police perimeter through an underground service tunnel that led out 3 miles away into a dense wooded ravine. 2 unmarked, heavily armored Chevrolet Suburbans were waiting for them. Lila sat in the back of the lead SUV, wrapping a clean field dressing around Dominic's bicep. The bullet had passed clean through the muscle, a lucky break that meant he could still hold a rifle. He barely winced as she pulled the bandage tight. "You're a long way from the ER, Doc," Dominic muttered, flexing his hand to test the circulation. "Don't remind me," Lila said dryly, packing her supplies away. In the front seat, Gabriel was staring at a tablet, a map of downtown Chicago glowing on the screen. He had changed into a fresh black suit he kept in the vehicle's emergency cache. If it weren't for the slight stiffness in his posture and the pallor of his skin, you would never know he was bleeding out hours earlier. "Carmine operates out of the Zenith Tower," Gabriel said, addressing the 3 loyal enforcers packed into the vehicle with him. "Penthouse suite. It's impenetrable from the outside. Private elevators, biometric scanners, and 30 armed guards. A frontal assault is suicide, boss. Well, a man named Leo stated from the driver's seat. We aren't doing a frontal assault," Gabriel replied smoothly. "Carmine thinks I'm pinned down at the estate bleeding to death. He thinks he's already won. He's hosting a sit-down at noon today with the Russian syndicate bosses to assure them the transition of power is complete and the trafficking routes are open." "The Russians won't step foot in the Zenith Tower," Dominic noted. "They hate high-rises, no escape routes." "Exactly." Gabriel smirked, a dark, lethal expression. "They're meeting at the old Navy Pier warehouses, Sector 4. Carmine will be out of his fortress surrounded by neutral parties. It's the only time his guard will be down." Gabriel turned in his seat, looking back at Lila. "Leo is going to drop you at a private airstrip in Gary, Indiana. I have a Gulfstream waiting. It will take you to Costa Rica. There's an offshore account under the name Lila Vance with $5 million in it. You saved my life twice, Doctor. Your debt is paid." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Costa Rica. $5 million. Freedom. It was everything she had been praying for since the nightmare began. But as Lila looked at Gabriel, his eyes guarded, she felt a sudden freezing spike of clarity. "No," Lila said. The entire SUV went dead silent. Dominic turned around, staring at her like she had lost her mind. Gabriel's brow furrowed, a flash of genuine surprise breaking through his stoic facade. "No," Gabriel repeated. "Lila, this isn't a negotiation. If I fail today, Carmine will hunt down everyone who helped me. You are getting on that plane." "Carmine's men already know my face," Lila argued, her heart hammering against her ribs. "They saw me at the estate. They know I'm the one keeping you alive. If you die today, Carmine will use his resources to find me whether I'm in Chicago or Costa Rica. A private jet doesn't erase my existence." "I have men who can erase your existence." "I'm staying," she interrupted, leaning forward, her voice leaving no room for argument. "You have torn internal sutures, Gabriel. Your blood volume is dangerously low. If you get into a firefight today, you won't survive the adrenaline crash. You need a doctor on site to stabilize you or you're a dead man walking." "She's right, boss," Dominic chimed in quietly. "You look like a corpse. If you go down during the hit, we lose the syndicate anyway." Gabriel stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. The tension between them was electric, a push and pull of dominance and survival. Finally, he gave a sharp, infinitesimal nod. "You stay in the vehicle with Leo," Gabriel ordered, his voice a low warning. "You do not step out. You do not engage. If things go south, Leo drives you straight to the airstrip. Understood." "Understood," Lila lied. The drive to Navy Pier was a masterclass in silent, terrifying preparation. Weapons were checked and loaded. Kevlar vests were strapped on. The air in the SUV was thick with the metallic scent of gun oil and the cold, heavy anticipation of violence. Lila was no longer just a kidnapped civilian. She had crossed an invisible line. She was riding with the Mercer Syndicate, and there was no going back. The Sector 4 warehouse was a massive, rusted, corrugated steel building, perched right on the edge of the gray chopping waters of Lake Michigan. Leo parked the armored SUV in an abandoned loading dock a block away, keeping the engine idling. The rain had started again, a freezing Chicago drizzle that coated the windshield in a gray film. "Comms check," Gabriel said, tapping the earpiece in his right ear. "Alpha team in position." A voice crackled over the radio. "Snipers have the roof. The Russians have arrived. 3 vehicles. Carmine is inside with his personal guard. Total hostile count 22. Gabriel checked the magazine of his Sig Sauer one last time. He looked over at Dominic. "We take Carmine alive. The rest are collateral." Dominic nodded, racking the slide of his tactical rifle. Gabriel turned to Lila. He didn't offer a reassuring smile or empty promises. He reached across the seat and wrapped his hand around the back of her neck, pulling her forward until their foreheads rested against each other. "Stay low, Lila." He breathed the scent of his cologne and the raw electric energy of his violence washing over her. "Don't tear your stitches," she whispered back. He released her, pushing open the heavy door. He and Dominic stepped out into the freezing rain, moving with terrifying, predatory grace toward the warehouse. Inside the SUV, the radio chatter was Lila's only lifeline to the chaos unfolding down the street. Leo sat completely rigid behind the wheel, his hand resting on a submachine gun in his lap. "Breaching in 3, 2, 1, a muffled concussive thump vibrated through the chassis of the SUV, followed instantly by the staccato roar of automatic gunfire. Lila clamped her hands over her ears, staring at the radio. The voices were frantic, overlapping in a chaotic symphony of war. "South door clear, pushing the catwalk. Contact right, drop him. The Russians are standing down. I repeat, the Russians are not engaging. They're letting us take Carmine." The gunfire raged for 5 excruciating minutes. Every second felt like an hour. Lila imagined Gabriel moving through the crossfire, his injured body pushed to the absolute limit, fighting for his life, his empire, and her survival. Suddenly, the gunfire stopped. An eerie, heavy silence fell over the radio. "Dominic." Lila grabbed the spare radio mic from the dashboard, ignoring Leo's warning glance. "Dominic, report." Static hissed. Then Gabriel's voice came through, low, breathless, and utterly victorious. "Bring the car up, Leo. We're done." Leo slammed the SUV into gear, tearing out of the loading dock and skidding to a halt directly in front of the massive warehouse doors. Gabriel walked out of the shadows. His dark suit was ruined, splattered with rain and blood that wasn't his own. Dominic was right behind him, dragging a battered, bloody figure by the collar of his expensive coat. It was Carmine. Dominic threw the underboss onto the wet pavement in front of the SUV. Carmine groaned, coughing up blood, his hands bound tightly behind his back. Gabriel stood over him, an absolute void of mercy in his gray eyes. He drew his pistol, aiming it directly at his cousin's head. "You tore the family apart for drug money." Gabriel stated, his voice carrying over the wind and the crashing waves of the lake. "You're weak, Gabe." Carmine spat, glaring up at him with pure hatred. "You were making us businessmen. We're wolves. We're supposed to eat." "Wolves protect the pack," Gabriel replied coldly. "You sold it out." The single gunshot echoed like a thunderclap across the empty pier. Carmine's body went limp on the wet asphalt. Gabriel didn't look back. He holstered his weapon, walked to the SUV, and slid into the back seat beside Lila. He was trembling, a violent shudder racking his massive frame as the adrenaline finally brutally abandoned him. "Drive," Gabriel ordered Leo. Lila immediately went to work. She tore his ruined suit jacket off, pulling the blood-soaked shirt away from his abdomen. The pressure bandage had held, but the sheer physical trauma of the assault had pushed him to the brink of collapse. She hooked up a fresh bag of IV saline, hanging it from a hook above the window, and taped the needle into his forearm. "You're a stubborn idiot," Lila muttered, her hands shaking as she wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. Gabriel let out a weak, breathy laugh. He leaned his head back against the leather seat, turning his face toward her. The warlord was gone, leaving only the man underneath. "It's over," he whispered. "The syndicate is mine. The trafficking rings are dead. You're safe, Lila." 2 weeks later, the heavy mahogany doors of Gabriel's study were open, letting in the warm afternoon sunlight. The estate had been repaired, the bullet holes patched, the shattered glass replaced. The Mercer syndicate was running quietly and efficiently purged of Carmine's poison. Lila stood by the massive windows overlooking the manicured lawns. She wasn't wearing scrubs or bloody jeans. She wore a tailored emerald silk dress holding a crystal glass of bourbon. Gabriel walked into the room leaning slightly on a silver-handled cane. The wound was finally closing properly, though the scar would be a permanent jagged reminder of the night their worlds collided. He walked over to his desk, picking up a thick manila envelope. He crossed the room and held it out to her. Passports, birth certificates, keys to a villa in Monaco, and the banking details for the $5 million. Gabriel said, his gray eyes unreadable. "My men will escort you to the private terminal. You never have to look over your shoulder again." Lila looked at the envelope. It was the exit door. It was the life she had wanted 2 weeks ago when she was just a tired ER doctor drowning in debt. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She had seen the darkness of Chicago's underbelly, and she had seen the man who controlled it. She had saved a monster, and in return, he had laid his empire at her feet. She took the envelope from his hand. Then deliberately she dropped it onto the hardwood floor. Gabriel's breath hitched. He stepped closer, the physical distance between them evaporating. "Lila," he warned, his voice dropping to that low, dangerous rumble. "If you stay, you belong to this world. You belong to me. There is no walking away a second time." "I know," Lila said, looking up into his stormy gray eyes. She reached out, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I've gotten used to the monsters, especially this one." Gabriel didn't hesitate. He dropped his cane, his arms wrapping around her waist as he pulled her flush against his chest, capturing her lips in a bruising, desperate kiss. The taste of bourbon and power enveloped her. The King of Chicago had reclaimed his throne, but she knew in the darkest, most terrifying corner of her heart that she was the one holding his life in her hands. And that is how a grueling late-night ER shift turned into a permanent reign alongside Chicago's most dangerous man. Lila didn't just save Gabriel Mercer's life. She became the only weakness he couldn't afford to lose. If you were captivated by this intense, dark romance drama, hit that like button and share this video with anyone who loves a thrilling, high-stakes story. Make sure to subscribe with notifications turned on so you never miss the next real-life storytelling upload. Drop a comment below letting us know if you would have taken the millions or stayed for the king.